Welcome to Strength in the Numbers. My name is Andrew Codd, accountant, author, and commercial finance entrepreneur, and it's my job each week to bring you leaders in finance and business and deconstruct with them their real stories, insights, and hard-won lessons into practical advice on the key strengths and qualities you need to remain relevant in accounting and finance today, as well as the steps you can begin to take to elevate the impact you make to have a fun, successful, and rewarding career in accounting and finance. Now let's go over to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Strength in the Numbers show. Now, this week's guest is Howard Cosby, who is a managing partner of a business process auditing firm, or forensic accounting as some people would term it. And Howard and myself struck up a friendship talking about all things finance and outside of finance. And one thing I really enjoy when I hear about Howard's stories is how his work leverages the fundamentals of accounting in the first place. It comes back to that learning about the business from the fundamental transactions and using those insights and intelligence to learn from and provide that assurance that assets are being safeguarded and the business is sustainable and hopefully is set on a good course or a good path for growth. So there are a number of the types of areas we cover during this conversation. You know, some of the things we touch on is how forensic accounting lays the groundwork for successful business process audits, and actually why a lot of these audits aren't being done successfully. And one of the encouraging things to me around the insights Howard shares is that for those auditors or traditional accountants fearful of the advances of technology, there is a massive role for good quality audits in all organizations. And Howard actually talks about the importance for SMEs as well, not just large enterprises. And how if we learn to work with technology, we can actually continue to remain relevant and create and capture more value for the organizations we serve as service providers or as employees. And I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did recording it with Howard. And if you did, please don't forget to share with your friends and colleagues, and also subscribe at the major platforms we're on, which is iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. And really appreciate you investing your time with us. So without further ado, over to Howard and the show. Howard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. A pleasure to be on this podcast, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and me too, Howard. And we got the chance to meet at a recent finance summit, and we had plenty of great conversations into the evenings on a couple of occasions.
Sure.
So I'm really excited about sharing your thoughts and experience with our audience. So before we get into that, perhaps would you mind briefly going through your story and your career in accounting and finance?
Yeah, sure. Background is what one might describe as fairly typical, having worked in London in a mainstream accountancy practice, learning one's way through the normal path of doing year-end audits alongside some taxation and accountancy type work as part of the qualification process. The organisation that I worked with was an organisation, although it was about top 10 practice in the UK, it was only of that size as a consequence of a series of mergers. And what particularly appealed to me, why I joined that organisation rather than some others, including one of the big four practices that offered me a position, was because of that breadth of opportunity to work with a diversity of clients. So although there were some large organisations, some very large organisations that were clients of that firm that I trained with, I enjoyed particularly working with some of the SMEs and felt that there was a lot more that could be done for SMEs, and as a consequence have taken my career in an unusual path in some respects, whereby I've gone into forensic accounting and business process audits, enabling organisations of all sizes to improve their business processes as a consequence of what our audits reveal for them. And this very specialised and focused audit area is something that I've grown to become pretty passionate about, and I've been involved in doing that for really the majority of my work in life now.
And Howard, I suppose that's interesting that you've developed from the audit into the business process auditing. Like, what's the main difference there between your traditional end of year financial audit?
The detail. We really get underneath the skin of the client organisation. We're looking into the transactions that are entered into with that organisation and third parties to a degree that, to be frank, was unimaginable a few decades ago, because with the advances of technology, we're able to get down to line level detail and be looking at the accountings that have taken place between those organisations and their supplier base and customers and other third parties. And we're actually able to verify whether things are going right, which is, of course, the case in the vast majority of instances, and indeed where things are going wrong and perhaps why they're going wrong and how they can be improved for the future. So it's a very much a hands-on relationship with the client in the true functionality of the business, which is, of course, very different from the year-end role, which, of course, I was involved in doing for a number of organisations previously.
Yeah, so look, it's an area I wouldn't be familiar with, and I guess some of our audience as well. I would say the word forensic gets my attention. It sounds very sexy, very much like those TV dramas that my wife Katie watches on TV around CSI, and I don't even know the names of them. I just know she watches them.
Yeah.
So, like when you use the word forensic, is that the case that it's used to refer to what's hands-on, or are there any sort of other specific type of techniques you use?
Well, most of the groundwork is done by deploying an audit program and data routines which identify where there are things that perhaps are worthy of investigation. And it is then the expertise of our personnel comes into play to make sure that those things are then investigated thoroughly and to a conclusion. So it is an interesting mix of science, data, and of course expertise. So in some respects, yeah, it's not that dissimilar from the silent witness type of programs, but without, to be perfectly frank, anybody ever being sent to prison.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's good to hear. Although I'm just trying to think, for someone working in their career and seeing a way maybe towards this forensic path. And by the way, I love the fact that it's the audit's done and it's just not left there, which sometimes I feel the case is with the financial year end audits. Like, okay, you go in. That was one of my frustrations actually. You go in, you sort of have a look at things probably could work better because you've seen it work better elsewhere, and you'd love to make that recommendation to add a bit more value. It seems like there's a lot of value there. In terms of the skill set or the person required to execute and deliver these jobs effectively, that you said there's a lot of mix of sort of data science, I guess client facing as well. Like what are the key skills Howard folks should be looking to develop in order to be successful in this space?
One of the key things, without a shadow of a doubt, is the stakeholder engagement attributes. The organisation, largely that we worked with in the past, have tended to be organisations of some size, some considerable size, and as a consequence, you are working with a multiplicity of stakeholders. So one could be dealing with procurement functions, one could be dealing with logistics, one could be dealing with marketing, one's dealing with finance, internal audit, people responsible for the tax areas of a particular client business. And we therefore have to have a skill set which enables us to engage appropriately with all of those people, and to be frank, across a number of levels as well. So from C-suite right down to the people who are responsible in the accounts receivable functions, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really how do you say, involved, or could be potentially involved in all parts of the value chain at some point in your dealing. So it must require a very good level of business understanding. Is there I suppose, I mean, I'm thinking obviously all organizations should probably be doing some form of this activity, if they were, not to put you out of business now, Howard, or anything, but what sort of steps could I suppose listeners take to ensure that at least they're doing the basics right of covering off these areas and improving their audit and their business processes?
I think the most important thing is that the type of audits that we can undertake, of course, I would say this, are best carried out by independent third-party professionals. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of the processes that we undertake that can't actually be transferred into the client organisation in the right way at the right time. But in the first instance, it's about finding out what is not going the way that it should be. And the only way to do that is to undertake a review, an audit, and then you work on how you can help the client improve their processes. And it is often the case that we don't know what is going to be found within a client organization. We have, of course, through our experience, have an idea of the various processes that need to be reviewed and indeed what the things are that we're likely to find. But they run to several hundred different process tests that we undertake. And in any organization, that mix is very varied. Ultimately, what we're talking about is not only about bringing value into the business, but also bringing intelligence, i.e. identifying things that the business was not actually previously aware of, as well as the regime of testing, the controls, the technologies, the processes, the people. You're providing assurance, and you're also, if you do the job properly, you're bringing learnings to the client organisation, a flight path towards improvement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it, Howard, because essentially in finance and accounting, we can be very reactive. We're looking at transactions after the fact and probably trying to meet some sort of deadlines as well. So things can get fairly time compressed. So maybe we're just not finding ourselves the space to kick the tires.
It's never on the top of the to-do list. The type of work that we undertake is never on the top of the to-do list. And that,
it's important.
It's
never urgent,
important. And indeed, the certain elements are indeed carried out, particularly in the larger organisations. But one of the things that we're driving forward is the fact that having pioneered this work in very large organisations, we can now take this to lesser enterprises and on an economic basis, so that there are organisations that have not previously undertaken this type of work could now actually have a service which is an information service that pays for itself and actually provides a very good ROI. So an organisational review process, which can be undertaken, to be perfectly frank, at any time, but is often comes to the top of the surface or towards the top of the to-do list when organisations are going through significant change like systems transformations and the like.
Yeah, where it really should feel like one of those sort of continuous practices.
Indeed.
Safety blanket. It's ironic that.
For sure. Yeah.
No, one thing that caught my attention, what you just said there, Howard, it's something I've been trying to drive since we started the podcast. It's to get finance professionals to think about the value we're offering. Not to. We're very good at having our NPV, net present value formulas and reducing things to numbers, but also just making sure that we do a great job preserving value, but actually driving value for the business. So when you said economic value and ROI there, have you got an approach that sort of, or in terms of what you do around the business processes, that allows you to communicate value back to the organizations you work with?
Yes, there's a very direct and clearly attributable benefit to the services. That is one of the things that clients enjoy the most. There's no need for anybody to feel that this is something that will be anything other than financially positive in terms of an undertaking in any client organisation. And the way that we approach the work is very similar to the the way that many finance professionals within business are working now, which is that there's much more what you would call collaborative approach towards what is effectively a knowledge management service. So it's very much about making sure that there's clarity about what is happening within any client environment, and making the most of the knowledge that accrues from the services that are provided.
I suppose this would be really helpful for our audience, Howard, in terms of, is there like a story, an example you could share with us where you're able to sort of trap and communicate that value? Because I think that's what a lot of us struggle with, is we know we're contributing to value somehow, just maybe how to communicate that value. Is there any sort of stories you could share, or a story you could share in terms of how you did that, and we could sort of learn from?
Yes, obviously on an anonymous basis because of client confidentiality, but there's one particular client organisation that springs to mind where we were asked to look into a particular activity that there were concerns around. The organisation had asked another team to go in there previously, and after a relatively short period of time, that team had basically said there was nothing that they could do, nothing that could be found. And we undertook the exercise, and within a very, very short space of time, circa 6 months or so, we'd identified and improved client profits by the thick end of £1 million as a consequence of the assignment that we undertook. And it's about investment, it's about putting the right people in the right place at the right time, and also having the right approach, and in particular the appropriate stakeholder engagement. And there have been instances similarly where clients have then come and said to us, well, okay, this is a non-core process, it's clearly not working terribly effectively, what can we do to improve the controls around this area? And we've worked with clients to help them improve that, that particular area going forward. And that they've found it to be extremely valuable, not in terms only of the immediate return of monies into the organisation, but also in terms of the future improvements in the way that the business is operating.
Look, that's very positive for us, Howard, because whether we're in practice or whether we're in a corporate or even a small size entity, I think our training gives us very good groundwork to go and assess controls, and at least sort of set a decent path forward of what works well and could work better. And in terms of maybe putting a value on that could work better, it's great to hear that you can identify and isolate particular values for clients, and I would encourage everyone listening to the show to actually do similar, to call out the bottom line impact we're contributing, because I think there's more to us than just preserving value in organizations. There's also us creating and capturing more. So Howard, thanks for showing us how it can be done and that it can be done. I'd like to also get your thoughts, I suppose, on what's maybe exciting you most about finance or your current work at the moment.
Without a shadow of a doubt, it's the fact that we are now able to take the work beyond the very large enterprises. We are actually able now to provide good, meaningful relationships to much smaller organisations than was ever previously the case. That, to be frank, is exciting to me because it was something that I was always passionate about. I mentioned that I went into the professional services service line with a view, largely to be blunt, to try and to help smaller organisations to a greater degree than I felt the profession was. And there was, to be blunt, a time when I was sidetracked into working with very large organisations for a number of very good reasons. But to be frank, the problems that arise within the very large enterprises are not that dissimilar from the same things that we see in the SME organisations that we're working with. You cannot get away from the fact that most of the processes are reasonably robust, but there will be instances, it could be pressured timelines, it could be a particular period where, to be frank, key personnel are away from the business for whatever reason, where things get dropped somehow, some way. And it's identifying those particular areas of the business and those particular times of the business, seeking out the vulnerabilities, which is important.
It's great ideas actually on areas to look for, and I really appreciate making this point, Howard. It's definitely one passion that drove me towards doing these podcasts, was trying to take some enterprise level finance experiences and making them available to smaller and medium-sized enterprises that, let's be face it, in a lot of our economies are still driving tremendous job prospects and economic results. And, you know, I think in terms of sustainability, we need to keep doing that and be mindful of that. So I'm really delighted that you found your way there, because I know, speaking with you previously as well, you know, we share a very similar passion for smaller and medium-sized enterprises and wanting to see them be successful.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And one of the things that I think is extremely important to the organizations that perhaps cannot afford the huge ERP systems that the larger organizations can, it's even more important that you have these type of independent reviews undertaken, because you don't know what you don't know. And that's the reality of the situation. We've put a lot of effort into providing a service that is non-disruptive, and most people can't believe how non-disruptive it is until they've actually experienced it. But at the end of the day, we would put everything into making sure that the client's needs come first. It's a very client-centric area of work. Ultimately, the vast majority of the clients are organisations who have said that they are only too pleased that they undertook the work, and indeed that they would repeat it in due course. The measurable value that was driven out.
Yeah, that's great there. And again, I think what you've done, you know, in this podcast, Howard, is you really showed us, or given us encouragement that it is possible to go demonstrate value to the organisations we support, whether internally or from external. So, thank you for doing that. And in terms of continuing that thread of advice, what perhaps has been the best bit of advice you've ever received?
Well, on a personal level, I can't answer it as a single piece of advice. It's advice that I'm sure plenty of other people have heard before, but really it's two pieces of advice, both from my father when I first heard them, which was enjoy your job, do your best and learn from it. And just can't emphasize enough about the fact that if you've got a passion, able to get yourself into something that you really, really enjoy in the same way that I have, then everything becomes a lot easier. But ultimately, it is always about continuously learning. And that's the great joy that comes from working with this huge variety of people and organisations. That, without a shadow of a doubt, something that I never have achieved if I hadn't gone down the route that I did. And I wanted to go into accountancy because of the fact that I knew that it would give me a chance to see businesses of a wide range of sectors. And I've also, of course, as I say, managed to get underneath the skin of those businesses to a degree that I never thought was possible a few decades ago.
Yeah, that's excellent advice there, Howard. And I think it also helps that not only are you doing that, but you're also contributing meaningful value back to them.
Yeah,
that's captured, and I think that's a very good theme emerging here. It's actually seeking that out and focusing on it so we can do more of it. And it's like a flywheel, you know, it just builds and builds positive momentum for not just your own career, but for the organisations you're supporting too.
That's absolutely right. There aren't negatives. That's the key thing. It is a virtuous circle without a shadow of a doubt.
And I suppose then, in terms of any resources you found useful, would there be perhaps any books or movies you could recommend our audience go check out?
Well, I'm a great believer in human psychology aspects. When one's dealing with things perhaps not going quite right, you can sometimes feel that you're treading on toes, and so on and so forth. So I'm a fan of somebody called Matthew Syed. I don't know if you're familiar with him. And some of his books are very well worth reading. One in particular that I go back to on more than one occasion is something called Guns, Germs and Steel by a writer called Jared Diamond, which effectively talks about humankind's development and so on and so forth. And I think as a base point, it's remarkably helpful, as I say, to help in terms of understanding the human condition. I don't have anything other than admiration for the amount of research that Diamond did, and as I say, I'd recommend it to anybody as a good read.
I always find those books fascinating, where people have researched our ancestry, so to say, and how we've developed and how the brain's developed and all those minds. So I look forward to checking that one out, Howard. And I guess, in terms of connecting with you, if people want to continue the conversation, how's best to go about that?
We do have a website, which is very simply vero-europe.com, which you can find our organisation. And we have, I think, Andrew, there's plenty of other elements of what Strength in Numbers is trying to achieve that I would be only too happy to contribute towards at some point in the future. So hopefully this isn't the last time I appear on one of your podcasts. But the one thing that I will say is that for those organisations that are unfamiliar with this type of work, and to be blunt, I think it's more subterranean than a lot of professional services, then feel free to reach out to me, and be delighted to have a conversation with anybody who's looking to try to move their business onward and upward.
That's fantastic, Howard. And what I will do is I'll put those details into the show notes that accompany this episode. So I'll put those links in, Howard. And I guess, like, you've been really great at showing advice. I love the fact that you're sort of leading the way in some extent in terms of capturing and demonstrating the value finance and our finance skills can offer organizations. Are there any other sort of parting thoughts you'd wish to leave our audience with, Howard?
I think there's one thing which is important to me. A while back now, I was mentored by somebody who was extremely successful and has been involved in raising finance for a large number of organisations, particularly in the UK. And as a consequence, he really has worked with the top levels of management within the UK. And one of the things that always stuck with me was when he said that, in his view, the best CEOs were accountants, possibly followed pretty closely by engineers, but those analytical skills were something that he felt were hugely important to business. And all I will say is that for the people who go into finance and accounting professions nowadays, I really would see it as perhaps not just a single route into CFO type positions, but also why not aim for the top slot as well? Because I have to say I do tend to agree with him over what I've seen across a wide range of businesses over quite a long period of time now. So there's no limit, I think, to people who go through our profession in the right way.
Yeah, that's brilliant. How like what a way to end this episode and this conversation, because it's been very encouraging. To sort of end on what's happened and also what potentially we can aim for in the future too. So Howard, really appreciate you investing your time with us today and coming on the show.
My pleasure, Andrew, and look forward, as I say, hopefully to be speaking to you again sometime soon.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to know more about our guests today, their bio, and follow up on the resources mentioned during the show, you can find all the relevant links and more at sitnshow.com. There you'll also be able to get access to earlier shows, read the latest blogs. There's also an opportunity to subscribe to our newsletter which will give you heads up as to when the next show is coming out, latest events, news, and anything that's going to be relevant to help you have a fun, rewarding, and successful career in finance and accounting. And just before you go, we really appreciate your feedback. If there's something we can do better on the show, something that's not working, or something you'd like to see, even a guest you'd like for us to invite onto the show, someone who you think might be able to benefit you more and also the rest of our community, please let me know. You can email me. I'm at andrew@sitnshow.com, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message so I know how you found me and we can connect. And really, it's our community that'll make the show. If we keep engaging and driving each other on, we'll keep on building our strength in the numbers. When all is said and done, if we can do the numbers better and finance better, we'll create more opportunities for ourselves, our friends, our families, our communities, and our businesses. So until next time, have a good rest of the week, take care, and let's keep building our strength in the numbers.